Nintendo Switch 2, the successor to the most successful system of all time at the time of the succession. The most risky transition, requiring careful balancing, timing, elimination of leakers, and most of all, the production of enough systems to prevent scalping. Nintendo history yet to be written, which can be best foretold through Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. So be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press notification bell. What defines Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and should define Switch 2? Bigger and better at the Nintendo Switch at its very best. First and third party hand in hand, and Smash Bros. Ultimate was one of the few games that offered a AAA, no compromises 1080p 60fps experience docked to a TV and 720p 60fps undocked on the system display. And that brings us straight into the question of power and balancing, specs versus price. Beginning from the Wii, Nintendo have maintained their TV systems at $300. With the big leaks in May before the big June leaker purge, everything is pointing to a change. The $400 sweet spot between Nintendo Switch and Xbox Series X/PS5 disc versions. And I'm gonna be honest, I support this price point 100%. As everything points to Nintendo cooking up not only a handheld undocked, but this time also a TV revolution when it comes to specs. The ultimate combination: Nvidia T239 custom-based chip with Samsung LP DDR5X 12GB of RAM. Not only that, with 256GB of UFS 3.1 internal storage, more than 4 times the internal storage compared to the $349 Nintendo Switch OLED model. Plus the Switch 2 also apparently has a built-in microphone. A massive leap from Tegra X1, granting the handheld undocked portion of the system a level of power right above the PS4, that is to say 1080p on its Full HD LCD display, but not any display, an 8-inch one. Yes, exactly like the PS Port, though also with even less bezel, putting even the current Nintendo Switch OLED model's bezel to shame. Or actually scratch that, the next step is no bezel, so that is where it is at. Most probably, another OLED display is being saved for the mandatory mid-gen OLED model upgrade come 2029. The true magic, however, is in the docked experience, as it is somewhere between the PS4 Pro and Xbox Series S, and that is before DLSS. Nvidia's wizardry, which will grant us graphics between Xbox Series S and X. It will not be on the same level as current gen, but that is simply not possible with a RAM that is slower than the PS5 and Xbox Series. At least it looks like we have more capacity than the Xbox Series S, with 10.5 to 11GB of RAM available to games if we follow the operative system, taking up the same amount as on the Switch, that being 1GB of RAM. The storage max speeds will likely be slightly under Xbox Series, 2.1GB per second in the case of the Switch 2 versus 2.4GB per second when it comes to the Xbox Series. Still, thanks to DLSS, 4K upscaling with 60 frames per second is a real possibility when docked to our 4K TVs. But how? Since the dock is connected to a power supply, in other words, no need to conserve battery. Plus, you're giving the system that extra juice required, with games like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate on the TV. Speaking of, the dock needs to be scaled down as it is the biggest obstacle in bringing my Switch with me for TV play when going abroad. Beat-em-ups with its concept really knocked it out of the park, apart from the shape of the Joy-Cons. But back to the TV possibilities, namely the most credible hands-on leak thus far. Gamescom 2023 Nintendo Industry Booth, from which direct witnesses we know that Final Fantasy VII Remake was in upscaled 4K and running more or less as good as on the PS5, while Zelda Breath of the Wild was upscaled in 4K and running in 60 frames per second. As we can read from all of this, it will not be native 4K like we see in the case of some PS5 and Xbox Series X games. But that is not what we expected from a hybrid system at a lower price on a version of physical games, not just digital ones. Let's remember, the successor is, as Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa stated himself in May, the same anytime, anywhere and anyhow experience, but with better hardware. And yes, the handheld experience is also getting a boost according to shipment hunters, from 720p HD ready to 1080p Full HD on the unlocked display. Plus, thanks to SSD, higher read and loading speeds, and that with far greater detail than ever before in our games. The Nintendo Switch, but on a whole new level. Add to that, better Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chips, and that is pretty much the internals covered. If all of this is true, for $400 you know, just like the record-breaking number of stages, music tracks, modes and more that was in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for $60, then I think we're in for the best system of all time. And we haven't even gotten to the controller experience and what truly matters, namely the games. When it comes to controllers, much like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, I would go for the GameCube controller with one more trigger button first before the titles, but no. What really matters for the Switch successor, more than what will be on its detachable controllers, is, just like for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, the number of playable characters/fighters, but in the case of the system, a bigger selection of AAA games than on the Nintendo Switch. And here we get to the matter of backwards compatibility at launch, or matching PS5 and Xbox Series in this field. In Smash Ultimate terms, Nintendo Switch successors, everyone is here, since backwards compatibility has become as much a leaked topic as the specs above. Some of them perhaps even in upscaled 4K, like who knows, Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, Super Mario Party Jamboree, yes even Mario and Luigi Brothership. There's no way that the latter of these will only get a few months to sell on the Switch, and then not be marketed as hey, you already have a Super Mario Party on the Switch 2 at launch. Jamboree, now in 4K. In some cases, like the biggest and most demanding games, like open world Zelda and Xenoblade, it might depend on what Nintendo's business strategy will be for Switch to Switch 2 ports. Like, we could see a situation where Breath of the Wild Switch is backwards compatible on the Switch 2, but not in 4K, because for that you will need to buy Zelda Breath of the Wild 4K in 2025. Naturally, that one being on a new, differently shaped cartridge, which will not fit and work on a regular Nintendo Switch. No matter what, allowing us to play our old Switch games will give this system the launch it needs, beside the day one must-have exclusives in upscaled 4K 60 frames per second. And to that category, I would like to put Metroid Prime 4K, Pokemon Legends ZA 4K, and the no-brainer for a successor, a brand new 3D Mario game. Eventually, we'll also have new IP 4K, Kirby 4K, Splatoon 4K, Luigi's Mansion 4K, sorry for the puns, and later down the line Monolithsoft's next game in 4K, Pokemon Gen 10 the same, Super Smash Bros. Not 4, but in 4K, more Mario Party, new Animal Crossing, and then around 3 to 4 years down the line from 2025, the release of a brand new 4K open air Zelda. Enough 4K puns, but you need something even bigger to secure success from day one. The successor to the best-selling Nintendo Switch game of all time, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. 62 million copies sold on the Switch alone, one of the best-selling games of all time. And it should be succeeded by Mario Kart X, or 10 if you prefer. Tour was 9, as the Switch 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass was a celebration of 30 years of Mario Kart with tracks from all mainline installments. Super, 64, Double Dash, GBA Super Circuit, DS, Wii, 7, 8 and Tour. And in this case, X meaning crossover. But with what? Characters and tracks from other Nintendo franchises than what we already have. Or perhaps also a few major Japanese third-party franchises. You know, just like in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Since what is the only thing left on PlayStation and Xbox, and not on Nintendo? The most ambitious big third-party games on day one. That is to say, before they win Game of the Year. Naturally, Elden Ring, possibly even with Shadow of the Erdtree, is a candidate to launch on the Nintendo Switch 2. The same goes for Baldur's Gate 3. It is just that it will be over 3 years after ER and around 2 years after BG3. What I'm instead talking about is far more multi-platform, so non-exclusive PS or Xbox games, day one on the Nintendo Switch 2 as on the other systems. And in this case, Square Enix recently might have teased that that is just their plan, as they are struggling to meet sales expectations with the games that are not on the hybrid home console/handheld Nintendo Switch. To the point that they even went out and stated that the future games will be available on all platforms, and I do sincerely believe that includes the Nintendo Switch 2, meaning that Final Fantasy XVII, yes even Cloud Strife of the complete Final Fantasy VII re-trilogy will be on the system, and with its final part coming out on the same day as on PlayStation. These and other new games like Visions of Mana or remade 3D Square Enix games have been missing on Nintendo Switch. The same goes for Kingdom Hearts, a franchise that has only been playable through the horrible cloud service. Another thing that definitely needs fixing on the Switch 2, if still even needed on the system. Even so, the big target that we already can show footage of is Kingdom Hearts 4. For crying out loud, Sora is in Smash Bros. Ultimate, so it only makes sense for his next game to launch on the same day on the Nintendo Switch successor. And that is only Square Enix, since Capcom has so much representation in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, including Ryu and Ken. But still, we have no Street Fighter 6 on the Nintendo Switch. It is rumored for Switch 2, but that is not the only thing we want. Our target is Rathalos, the boss of Ultimate, and Monster Hunter Wilds on the same day as the other systems in 2025, plus the next Devil May Cry and Resident Evil. And even then, that is just the tip of the iceberg of what we want on the Nintendo Switch 2. Since we also need on day one From Software's future title, Bandai Namco's Tekken, Atlus Persona 6, Konami's future games, the huge lineup that Sega is preparing for the next few years, and so much more. But even here, we're still only listing franchises from Japanese developers. After all, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate through its DLC finally went beyond with Banjo-Kazooie, the first Western inclusion. That leaves us with the successor to the Joy-Cons, and despite being a part of the Joy-Con boys, I would never play Super Smash Bros. Ultimate with Joy-Cons docked, as the GameCube controller remains superior for that game, and for other games, we have the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, a controller that only needs slight improvements. But since we're on the topic of the next Joy-Cons, the D-pad needs to return whether in the form proposed by Endo or traditional. Personally, I would want a return to what has been tried and evolved from the Famicom/NES to Nintendo Switch Lite and the Pro Controller. Then we have the matter of the analog sticks and drifting. Apparently, that issue has been solved with magnets, but I don't think that alone is enough. We also need bigger, more comfortable sticks, and if possible, analog triggers. But it isn't the most essential. Same goes for the new button that is reportedly being added on the right control. What I do care about though are bigger action buttons. A big bonus if these have the Super Famicom/European SNES color pattern. Finally, we need the same good battery life like the Switch has had since 2019, and I would say that we have it. The ultimate Nintendo Switch 2 all being explained with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for the different categories or controllers tied to this one. But with that being said, I still hope it will be called Super Nintendo Switch. That hasn't changed in the slightest since the beginning of 2024, and in truth, late 2023, though Nintendo Switch 2 also works. Why these two? You need a clear name that indicates succession, and the so-called leak Nintendo Switch attach is a terrible name. Wii U all over again. Though it could tie to magnetic Joy-Cons that are not connected the same way on the rails as the current Joy-Cons. Either way, what is the ultimate Nintendo Switch 2 for you? Sound off in the comment section down below. If you haven't already, then be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press that notification bell. Last, a big thanks to you for watching and to all our patreon.com/CommonRealm patrons. Special shoutouts to Raw producers Zach Johnson and JC Funk, and heroes Holly Wolf, Cheryl and Garrett Hoy. You rock, and please enjoy one or both of these two awesome videos.